This is the FI After 40 podcast, a show where I dive into the FIRE movement to see what financial independence is all about. I'll share the steps I've taken to start my journey toward becoming financially independent, and along the way I'll bring in others who are on a path of their own. You'll hear stories and advice from people who have reached their version of FI, and from those like me who are still finding their way. This is a show for anyone who wants to learn, grow, and connect with others. This is FI After 40. Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Ben, and you're listening to the FI After 40 podcast, episode number 15. So thanks for taking some time out of your day to hang out with me and listen to the show. Hopefully you learned something today, maybe get some inspiration or some encouragement to take action on something that's been nagging you. I know I've had this whole list of things, both kind of prior to doing this podcast, but also in my day-to-day right now that I'm constantly cycling through my to-do list of things, and I feel like it's pretty overwhelming. So today what I want to do is take a step back and remind myself, and you as well, what the purpose of the podcast is. So what I'm going to do is revisit the FI After 40 manifesto that I wrote recently. Came out a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, and I want to touch on some of those key points that I put into that piece, because I think it's a really important thing to revisit and talk through with you, so that way you understand where I'm coming from with both the podcast, the blog, what my goals are, and kind of my commitment to you moving forward with this show. I'm also going to take to Twitter and pull some comments from a recent thread that I was part of, where there was a simple question that was asked looking for people's top money rules. And so I grabbed a few of those, and I want to walk through those, give you my thoughts on them. I think there's some really interesting responses and some really core principles that are important to spend some time talking through. I have a recent blog post that also goes into that topic as well, so I'll give you that in the show notes so you can dig into it even more. But I did want to touch on at least a few of those to give you a sense of here are some core money rules that you can focus on to make progress in your life. But the first thing I want to do is actually jump over to an email that I received from a new listener. So this is an email I received about a week ago from a listener who just came across this show, and I think it was really something that hit home for me, that I guess it brought home the point that what I'm putting out through this podcast and the blog is really connecting with certain people. So I did want to read through it because I feel like it's important to see where other people are coming from and how hearing these types of stories from the guests that I've brought on can really be an inspiration, and how those can really make a difference for people. So I'm going to read through this. It's a really heartfelt email, and I think it's just, again, something that is worth sharing with the audience. So the email subject was, "Wow, thanks so much for your podcast." And then it goes in and says, "Dear Ben, last night I came across your podcast. I'm already on episode 6. They're amazing and exactly what I've been looking for as I start my journey to FI in my 40s. The similarities in our lives are many. I also work in higher education. I'm completely attracted to the idea of FI, but not much for frugality. And I dream of a lake house. Now I feel like it's time to create a financial plan and intention to thrive today and tomorrow. It's amazing to discover the online resources and community of people who help support each other in this pursuit. This weekend, I'm looking forward to listening to the other podcasts you've published, and I've subscribed through your homepage for future updates. Thanks again." So the reason I wanted to share that again is I think it's important to hear those other stories and realize there are others in the same place as you. And this is helpful for me, actually, to hear, there's other people that are in their 40s or their late 30s, and they're kind of going down that same path, making those same choices, realizing that there's changes that need to be made. And so it's helpful for me to hear it, and I think it's also helpful for you to hear it, to know, there's other people out there that are in a similar boat. I also love the point that she made in this email, saying that she's really looking to live with intention. And that's been one of my biggest takeaways as I've gone through this, is really trying to be more intentional with my life, intentional with my spending, financial spending, how I spend my time, what I focus on. So that it's something that really hits home for me. And it's one of those core principles. Again, I think if you can start to live more intentionally, it makes such a difference and opens up so many possibilities. Also, it's just one of the best parts of being in this community is how supportive it is. And the point about connecting with others and learning and having it be a resource, That's spot on. It's exactly what this is. It's not a competitive, judgy thing. I know I've mentioned this before, but it's something that I've really realized as I've connected with others is that you can use social media and blogs and podcasts to really learn from others and realize you don't have to go reinvent the wheel. There's other people that are just a couple of steps ahead of you, and you can follow along and learn from their mistakes and then make your own choices along the way too. So I think it's a reminder that getting involved with this community, seeking financial independence and financial freedom, and the FIRE movement, all these different versions of really just getting yourself into a good place financially so you have flexibility, you have options. It's a worthwhile endeavor, and there's a lot of resources out there to learn from. Okay, so now I want to jump over to what I mentioned with the Twitter conversation. So there was a blogger who posted a question maybe a week ago and asked, "What are your top 3 money rules?" And the responses my notifications haven't stopped since then. So there's a constant stream of people responding to this and adding their 2 cents. And it's been really interesting and inspirational to hear all these different perspectives. And there's definitely some overlapping themes that we'll hear. But what I wanted to do was actually read through some of the specific examples, who pointed them out, to give them a shout out, and then also point you over to the blog to get into more depth on this, because I did pull a larger sample for a blog post. But for this, I want to at least touch on 10 different money rules. And these are 10 different ones. They're not the same ones that are in the blog. They might be a little similar, but they are different people. So again, I want to go through these and read what they posted, and then also share my perspective on it, so you can kind of think along the lines of what I'm thinking with some of these points. So the first one is from @PartnersInFire, and the comment is, "Pay yourself first, invest and save." So this is just a core principle of paying yourself first, and it's something I heard in Rich Dad Poor Dad. That's if he didn't coin the phrase, it definitely is something that I'm familiar with from that book. And again, the idea is, if you're able to set aside money before you go off and pay all the rest of your bills and spend money on all the rest of the things in your life, if you're able to pay yourself first by saving and investing, that's the best way to go about doing this. And it's something that didn't really resonate with me for a long time. My concern was always, how can I pay myself first when I've got all these bills to pay? And the idea is, you adjust to your budget. And an example that I'll use is, I never knew how I was going to pay for childcare for my kids. And then once we started doing it, you just kind of figure it out. You find room in your budget, you cut other areas. So if you're paying yourself first by investing in retirement, setting aside money for savings, then what you're left over with, you should still have enough to pay your bills and do your discretionary spending, and you'll adjust to that based on what you have. So getting in the habit of putting that money aside first is one of the best things that you can do to get yourself going early on. The second one is from someone, I'm going to mispronounce the name, I apologize, but it's Hannah Hakodesh. And she says, "Cancel any subscriptions that you don't use, like the Kindle app." So that's just one example, but I'm sure any of you listening can come up with 2, 3, 4, 5 different things that you pay on a monthly basis that you don't really use that often, but you kind of are just used to having it. And it's only $5, it's only $10, but again, those are the things that really add up over a long period of time. And if you're not using something, or if you can live without it, that's an easy win. You can cut that out of your budget. For me, for a long time, I cut out my premium Spotify membership. I actually renewed it for the summer, because this is when I'm outside on the water listening to music. So I might use it in the summer, but then in the winter or in the fall and spring, I'm not really using it that much. And so it was easy for me to cut that $10 out of my budget. So if you can identify a handful of things to cut out, again, just an easy win, an easy way to knock some money off your budget and throw some money in savings. The next one's from @MatthewLee7, and he writes, 3-month liquid, non-invested emergency fund, minimum. Now, I'll admit, I'm not good about having an emergency fund. I've never really had an emergency fund. I've always looked at credit cards as my emergency fund, and that's what's got me into trouble over the years. So I totally understand the point of getting that money set aside. You can argue, is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Is it a year worth that you really need? And really, any of it's better than not having it. But I think 3 months is a nice minimum starting point to say, hey, if worst comes to worst, I've got 3 months covered with my expenses. And guess what? The worst has happened for a lot of people over the last few months. So you don't know what's going to happen in the future. Having that money set aside as an emergency fund is for a lot of people a non-negotiable. And I would agree that if I was in a better position, I would definitely prioritize this. It's something that I'm looking to do in the near future as soon as I finish paying off that last little chunk of credit card debt. And speaking of credit cards, the next one is from @IQ by Susie Q, and it's always pay off my credit card bill. That's just, again, something that if you don't pay off your credit card bill on a regular basis, and guess what? That's me, and that has been me for a long time, and it's a lot of you out there. If you can make that change, getting that credit card bill off of your budget and opening up that $300, $500, $800 a month that you're paying in credit card bills, man, if you can figure that out, that is the game changer that you can start off with. And that opens up a lot of extra funding to put into savings, to, getting that emergency fund started up, investing in your retirement. There's so many things you can do with that. It really makes a huge difference. And not only is it productive and financially responsible to do, it just removes so much stress if you're not carrying that invisible burden of debt with you from month to month. So yeah, always paying off your credit card bill. If you can get that habit established, you're going to be so much better off. Next is from @KUWT Bulls. So keeping up with the Bulls. And it's prioritize increasing your income over cutting spending. Now, this one's interesting because people really do focus on cutting your spending. I just talked about cutting out using little apps and saving $5, $10 here or there. And again, that's helpful. But yes, increasing your income, that there's only so much you can cut from your spending. You can really cut that down to bare bones, and that's going to be helpful. But there's a finite amount of savings that you can do by cutting your spending. Increasing your income, that's really the exponential area of growth there. So finding a side hustle, it's kind of an overused phrase, but there's just so many ways that you can find to make money these days, especially online. There's got to be ways that you can increase your income, either in your current job, adding a second job, or a side hustle. And honestly, one of the things that I love about that whole concept of a side hustle is you may find out that this side thing that you're doing that you actually like doing, that's just making you a few $100 a month, that could end up becoming a career, and you may be able to move away from a job that you don't really love as you get to be more financially stable. So increasing your income is something that obviously we all would love to do, but really focusing on finding ways to do that is going to be super helpful for you. The next one's from @ALifeOnADime, and it's always take the employer match on retirement. Now, this sounds like common sense, and you'd assume that most people do this when they have the opportunity, but I'm telling you, there's probably a lot of people that aren't taking that employer match, because usually that means that they have to put more money out of their pocket up front for their employer to match. So the idea of taking more money out of your paycheck for retirement can be a tough choice to make, but especially if you're later in your career and you have not started doing this yet, or you haven't really prioritized it, it's got to be a huge priority for you. You really need to take advantage of that match. It's free money. And the sooner you start, the sooner you're going to start earning returns on it. So if you haven't yet done it, just do it. Okay, the next one is @FightToFire1, and it's think about price and quality. Don't just blindly go for the cheapest. So this is going down that path of frugality and finding value in things. And I love this concept. I feel like I've had this kind of love-hate relationship with frugality as I've gotten more into this FIRE movement. And the more I hear people talk about frugality and really seeking value over the cheapest price, the more it really makes sense to me. It's still a hard thing for me to embrace, but I get it. And I think that if you can really focus on getting quality items, whatever it is that you're buying, not just trying to find the cheapest thing possible to save money, but buying something that's going to last a while so you don't have to replace it in 6 months or a year. That's really one of the best ways that over a long period of time you can end up saving money, is that you're getting high value items and you don't need to replace them constantly. Next is from @JoniTalks, and it's a simple one. It's health before wealth. Now, this is something that I have struggled with actually during this quarantine. It's been interesting because I think there's a lot of people who have become more active. They've gotten out and gone walking more, or kind of been out in the community walking around and maybe running. And I've actually been less active because I was in the habit of going to the gym, and I haven't been able to go to the gym because my employer, who has a gym, hasn't been open. So I have not prioritized my health during this time, while I have been working on increasing my wealth. So again, it's a balancing act. You really need to find both of those things. So making sure that you're finding activity in your day and finding ways to stay active and eating healthy. And, I know a lot of people that talk about spending a little bit more money on their food so they get quality food and they're not just getting, again, the cheapest stuff they can. I can tell you that I feel the effect of having too many kind of highly processed, just like simple carbs. And yeah, that stuff is really cheap and it helps the budget. But I can feel the difference between that and when I'm eating high quality vegetables and high quality proteins. And so I'm a total proponent for saving money in your grocery budget. But, you can find ways to do that without totally sacrificing the quality. And again, you got to stay active. You've got to make that a priority, especially as you're aging. The more you can make sure that you're physically prepared to age. Those little nagging pains, aches and pains are just like it drives me crazy. I'm dealing with it myself, and I know that I need to prioritize it better. Okay, so I've got two more here. So this one is from @MishLovesMoney, and it's never ever have debt. None of it is good, in quotation marks. So this is a little bit of a debate. People talk about, is there good debt versus bad debt? So consumer debt, which is going to be credit cards or personal loans, that's not good. There's no benefit to that really. It's just buying something that you can't afford yet. A lot of people will argue, even cars, don't take out car loans. You got to save up for a car and get something that's affordable. And if you can't afford it, you shouldn't be buying it. The real exception that people will make is with your primary residence. I personally am renting right now. I'm finding a lot of value in that versus owning a home. I've owned two homes in the past, and I am looking to invest in real estate for an investment property. So again, to me, that's debt where you're leveraging it to make money because it's an investment that would have a return if I have tenants that are paying me rent. But even with your primary residence, calling it an asset, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It really depends on timing of the market, how long you live there, if you end up selling at some point, and you don't necessarily know how that's all going to work out. So it's hard to bank on your primary residence as a real asset. It's not to say that it won't be, but you're just, it's not a sure thing. So I get it. Again, I get the idea of really avoid debt at all costs. And I would say I agree, especially with consumer debt. And then I'm kind of on the fence about your primary residence. But my recommendation and what I'm shooting for is to look towards having an investment property where I can have tenants that are paying down my mortgage for me. And the last one on the list is from @ADimeSaved. And it's, again, very simple. It's budget, budget, budget. I'm not somebody who's done a great job with budgeting in the past. I am definitely better with it now. One of the things I've talked about a bunch of times is I've got a separate account for my groceries. I've got money that comes out of my paycheck every 2 weeks. It goes right into this account, and I just use that for groceries. So I know exactly how much I have to spend on food. That's an easy way for me to budget my groceries and my food. If you aren't great at budgeting, I would say at the very least track your spending, and that at least shows you the trends. But having a budget is something, it's so easy now. There's so many apps. You can use Mint. You can track your spending with Personal Capital. There's a lot of ways that you can get at keeping track of what you're doing and setting that budget. And find your comfort zone. I've seen people. I heard Maggie from Friends on Fire talking about budgeting and comparing it to like tracking your calories when you're trying to lose weight. And yeah, it can be exhausting. It can be really mentally challenging for some people. But I would say definitely give it a try. Do it for a couple of months, see how much it helps. And if it's something you're comfortable with, stick with it until you're really out of debt. Once you've got into a better place, you might not need to really focus on that. But at least for a short period of time while you're trying to get your stuff together, budgeting is going to make a huge difference for you. So there you go. That's 10 rules for managing your money, pulled straight from Twitter, from a bunch of different sources, a bunch of bloggers, there's podcasters, there's people that are just out there sharing their thoughts on things. So it's regular people. And that's what I put in the blog. I put a post in. It's 51 eye-opening money rules to live by. So I hope that's helpful for you. Now, the last thing I want to spend a few minutes on is revisiting the 5 After 40 manifesto. So I wrote it, as I said, a few weeks ago, and I really wanted to spend some time focusing myself on who my target audience is with this whole project. So I've got the blog, I've got the podcast. My intent is to help inspire people and lead them towards making the same progress that I've started to make. And so when I first started all this, I wasn't quite sure who that audience was. I kind of thought I knew, but I just wanted to get things going. So I just started writing and I started recording. And now that I've been doing it for a few months, it makes more sense to me who I'm targeting. And so, for those people who are kind of later in their career, mid-career, making some decent money, but they haven't really prioritized their finances. They know in the back of their head they haven't saved enough, but it's just they don't know where to start. It's just they're so used to it. They figure, you know what, hey, I'm on this path. I can't really make any changes at this point. I'm already 38. I'm already 44, whatever it is. How am I going to really make a difference when I've only got, 20 years left at this point? I'm already halfway through my career. So those are the people who are really in a similar spot to where I was just a year or two ago. And so I really want to focus on that group. A lot of the things that I've talked about on this podcast and in the blog are applicable to anybody. So it doesn't matter if you're 22 or if you're 52. It's budgeting, it's saving, it's things that are going to help get you on track financially. But the stories that I'm trying to tell is I want to really help those people who have an opportunity to still make a big difference. It's not too late to make that change. And that's really what I wanted to outline in that manifesto. So one portion of that piece in particular that I wanted to touch on is I listed out 4 different commitments that I have to myself and to the audience. So I wanted to just revisit those, talk through them briefly, and use them as a reminder for people as they're maybe listening to this for the first time or just finding the blog for the first time. So the first piece is I know where you're coming from. I might not share your exact story, but I know the feeling of not quite living up to the potential you know is inside yourself. I'm not your guide, I'm your partner on the journey. So this is just me wanting to connect with that audience and saying, hey, listen, you are not alone. I'm right with you. I've maybe taken a couple of steps that you haven't yet, but I know exactly where you're coming from, and there are a lot of people in the same situation. So do something. It's not too late. So that's what I hope to get out of that first point. The second point is I'm determined to move forward and make gradual progress. I'll share my progress so you can see what works. So none of this is get out of debt in 30 days or 1 year until you're a millionaire. It's none of this get rich quick stuff. A lot of this takes time. You're not going to get there overnight. You're not going to get there in a month. It takes a while, but every little step that you make, every little change that you make starts to build momentum. So the point is, it's a gradual process. I'm being patient. I've got a 15-year plan that I've broken up into 3 different sections, and I know where I want to be with my savings, with my debt to income ratio, how much I'm setting aside for retirement each year in each of those phases. And so, taking that time to sit down and lay that all out, and I'll share as I go if it's working. And I know I'm going to have to change some things. And it's not that I have to have this perfect plan that I follow to a T, but at least having something outlined that I'm working towards, again, is better than just sitting back and letting life happen to me. The third point is I will continue to fail, but I will do so while trying to improve my life, and I will learn and grow. I'll stop failing through inactivity and toxic avoidance. So that concept of toxic avoidance for me, it just is how I've dealt with a lot. I just mentioned letting life happen to me. I need to be more intentional about things. I can't just wait for something good to happen. And I think, unfortunately, in my past, a lot of things have just worked themselves out. So by me procrastinating and just kind of waiting around for things to resolve themselves, that's actually worked for me in the past. But that's not how it's going to work moving forward. It's really more of good fortune than it is a good plan. And so it's okay if I fail. Failure is just me trying something new and stepping out of my comfort zone. And I'm much more comfortable with being uncomfortable now than I ever have before. And the fourth and final part of this is I'll share my successes and I'll share motivation. I want to hear from others who have learned and are making progress in their life. And that message will be broadcast loud and clear. So the best part for me about the podcast in particular is it's a really good forum to tell stories. And I've loved talking to people so far and hearing what they've done. And it's talking to people who haven't figured it all out yet. And to me, that's so relatable and realistic. And it's exactly what I want to bring onto this show. It's not people who have already reached this magical utopia of financial independence. I probably will talk to some of those people, and I have talked to people who have made a lot of progress, but the idea isn't necessarily that finish line or this far off place. It's helping you to start making changes so that you're enjoying your life on the way. I've seen people reference this in other blogs and other podcasts. I've talked with Jessica from the Pioneers, and I just love this concept of the journey is as remarkable as the destination. And, I'll steal that from them because I think it's just so powerful, and it's exactly what I want to do. I don't want to just get to this place and suffer along the way. It's about leading a better life and then setting myself up for a better future. And I really feel like that's possible by focusing on getting your finances together and living a great life along the way. So if you haven't had a chance to read the full thing, I encourage you to go over to the website, the 5 After 40 Manifesto. I'll link to it in the show notes. And again, it's just a summary of kind of what I want moving forward. And I hope that helps to make it really clear what my goal is and what you're going to get from participating in the blog and the podcast. So that's it for today's episode. Hopefully you got something good out of it. Again, go back to the blog, take a look at some of the posts I've put in there, and share the episode with someone that you think might benefit from it. Really, word of mouth is the best way to get that message out there, and I hope that people who are enjoying it are telling others about it. I've seen some great reviews on Apple recently. If you're an iPhone user, I would love it if you can leave me a 5-star rating and drop a review in there. It's really helpful to hear that feedback. Again, as always, reach out to me on social media. If you've got questions, suggestions, you can get me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And really, I've revamped the website. If you haven't been to it recently, I updated it. So 5after40.com is much more geared towards allowing people to listen to the podcast right on the website. So I kind of gave it a facelift over the last couple of weeks. So if you haven't been there recently, jump over and check out the website. But otherwise, that's it for now. Again, thanks for spending some time with me. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I will talk to you next week. To read more about my story, be sure to follow me at 5after40 on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also subscribe to receive updates whenever new content goes up at 5after40.com. Also, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a rating and review. It makes a big difference. Thanks for listening.